a single day that I hated to go to work. I loved every single day of it. It was a great place to work. It's a great town to work in. Our customers were wonderful. I had nothing but great employees. I can't think of any specific memorable moments, just offhand.
That's a tough question to throw at somebody, off the top of their head.
Yeah, it is offhand.
Sorry.
I'm sure if we were to start on some, they'd roll in, but I can't think of any offhand.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing you need a week to think about, and then,
Maybe, maybe.
Or maybe not,
I don't know. It's just, it was a great store, and it was just easy to work there, and we just had a good time. It's just a wonderful place to work.
Well, so we're into the 80s, and I can't remember the year you said you ended up closing or selling.
We closed in 1994.
94. Can you talk about how that came about? Was that?
Well, yes. My wife was very, very ill, and I knew that I needed to tend to her, so I placed a letter amongst other stores in northern Indiana. I mailed it to anybody that I thought might be interested and let it be known that the store was for sale. And I didn't get any nibbles for about a year. And so I made some phone calls, and I even, tried to do some personal contact with people here in town, people that I thought might be interested and that I thought had a chance of being able to run it. And I did get a few nibbles, and some seemed reasonable and some seemed ridiculous. And I had to talk a couple of people out of even considering it, because I knew that they would be wasting their time and their money. And so a couple of years went by before Pam Fisher showed some interest, and she came in one day and said, should I be interested in this? And we said, my gosh, yes. We knew that she was an intelligent gal, and she had good taste, and we had known her as a customer. And she didn't want anybody to know that she was inquiring, because she just would rather keep it under wraps, So we had a little session with her, and we took her to Chicago on our buying trip to show her how it was done, and what we engaged in, and with the salesman and that sort of thing, because she had never done any retail at all. And she just is a natural. She just has good common sense, she has good taste, and we knew right off the bat that this could work. And so she just needed convincing herself. And as we worked with her in almost a clandestine manner, we sort of convinced her that she had what it takes to run a store, and she finally was convinced herself. And then she got really excited about it, and it worked just great. And she's doing a fine job.
I was going to say, she's at 12 years now.
I'm happy for her, and yes, it's been 11 years, almost 12 years actually. In a few more days it will be 12 years. And she's very happy, and so are we. And I'm tickled that the store is still alive and well. And the tradition goes on.
It's almost, it's over 100 years, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's
right. A little over 100.
Was it tough to leave, or were you just needed to do it and you were ready?
No, it's funny, as much as I love that store and everything, I think I was so happy that it was in good hands, and I was happy that I could get out of there and be with my wife, because she was terminal. And so it was only 4 months later that she died. So I did get a little time, to spend with her, and that was important. But I think for all those reasons, it just seemed natural at the time. If it hadn't been for that, I'm not so sure that I wouldn't still be there, because I loved the store, and I really wasn't tired of working.
Well, you mentioned your wife and then moving to Culver because your wife's mom was here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who was your wife's mom?
Her name was Merle Butler, and she ran, it was a little hotel resort kind of place called the Vitawe. which was on the east side, the southeast side, in the end of the lane down there. That building has now been torn down. But it was called the East Shore Inn at one time, and the Bidewee was the last name that we ever knew about. But she had become a widow, and she had a few bucks as a down payment on that place, I guess, and so she was running it. And it had some cottages around the main house and for fishermen, that sort of thing. It was pretty rustic, really. It wasn't very fancy by any means. But she did that for 2 or 3 years and then moved to Florida. But we stayed here, of course.
So she had bought it from someone and we ran it for 2 or 3 years.
Somebody had been trying to run it and wasn't doing a very good job, and she thought maybe she could pick it up and make a small living just to keep herself going, since she was a widow. But it didn't make much money, and I think she realized that it wasn't going to, so she moved to Florida.
Okay, that's I didn't know that connection. I've seen a lot of images of the Bidewee.
Yeah.
Interesting. Which kind of makes me think of, as we talked earlier about just the whole downtown area and how it's changed. The different stores.
Oh yes, yes. From when I first got into business here till now, of course, I'm sure all the other business owners will tell you the same thing. There was, so many grocery stores and so many gas stations and so many restaurants. Of course, we still have a lot of restaurants, but the retail stores are down considerably. But you look at any town, any small town, especially towns of our size, and you will see that that's happening all over. There are very few clothing stores, shoe stores, furniture stores. Those sort of things just aren't surviving in small towns anymore. It takes a large population to support those. And we're doing pretty well, I'd say. Our town looks great. We have very few dead buildings. We have very few empty buildings. I'm just tickled that our town fathers and business people have been able to keep it going and do such a magnificent job of working hard to keep it healthy. I think it's in good shape.
Yeah, it really, it is.
Yeah, it is.
It's great.
Compared to most other small towns.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot that have really almost died out.
Oh yeah. Terrible.
Well, as just looking up and down the streets, particularly that block there where you were at, who was there then, and what did those stores look like in those days?
When I took over, there was a corner tavern, which of course is Corn Dance, and then next to that was another tavern, strangely enough, and then next to that was Klein's Appliance, which is where the Susie's restaurant is now, and then was our clothing store, and then next to us was Quality Grocery Store, and then next to that was a drugstore. The Irvins, Barrett Irvin and his wife Lucille had a drugstore there, and next to that was a shoemaker shop, which is where Clothiers Insurance is now.
It was a shoemaker shop?
Well, it's a shoe repair shop.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't make shoes, he repaired them. A very small little building, as you can see, and it was just right for that kind of a business, I guess. And then where the park is now, of course, was a gas station. You remember that?
I do, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then up on the block that we're in right now, of course, everything is pretty much the same, except that there was a church here on the corner. And then later on, when that was taken down, I think NIPSCO building was put in its place. Then across the street, Troon's had a shop. You remember that?
I don't.
Do you remember that? That was a retail store. They had men's and women's and gifts. And then next to that was a barber shop, I believe. And then the A&P a grocery store. And then possibly the women's shop. Foreman's, I think it was. Let me think. Yeah, I think it was Foreman's at that. I'm not sure about the name, but who had it at that time when we moved in. And then next to them, I believe, was another drugstore, Rector's drugstore. And then next to them, I think was the corner. That was the a restaurant, another restaurant. And then down to the next block was a gas station, of course. We were
Where Mary's shop is now. Right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's right. And then that building had a news agency in it.
Is that run by Tabor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill Tabor.
Okay.
I think, of course, I think John Hosel might have had it at that time, and then Tabor took over immediately after, but they both had it at one time or another. And then I'm a little foggy about what was after that, but there was another barber shop underneath where Ruth is now. It was in the basement.
Yeah, where the collector's antique shop in
Yeah,
the basement.
yeah. And then there was a plumbing shop. Earl Dean Overmeyer had a plumbing shop right there. And then the hardware store.
Now, when you got here, was the hardware store still 2 floors?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, within a year or two, I think it was, he had the big fire. Right. Somebody who dealt with the bank at some time or another had some dealings with W. Osborne, and so I would think you wouldn't have very little trouble finding people that had anecdotes about W. Osborne. He goes way back, and he was here all the time, and he was involved all the time. So it seemed to me, I know all the years that I was here, people were constantly saying something about W.O. did this or W.O. did that, or they had some dealings with him that they remembered. So I'll bet you that through the years you'll find a lot of people can tell you things about him. And he was sharp and working up until his 90s, I guess.
I think he passed away in the early 80s, right? In the early 80s,
Yes,
and
yes.
he was in his
but
90s.
in his 90s at that time, I think. Yeah, he was my landlord for many years. He owned the building that I was in, and when the time came that he and his sister actually owned it, she lived in California. And one day he called me, actually his secretary called me and said, Mr. Osmond would like to talk to you, can you come over? Well, of course, if Mr. Osmond summons you, come over. And so I came over, and he said, well, my sister, who is very elderly, and I, who am getting on in years, decided that we need to get rid of some property. And you're in the building, and you've been the oldest renter in that building. And he said, I want to give you the first opportunity to buy that building if you're interested at all. And I said, well, I probably am. I don't know. I don't have any money, but I suppose I should be interested in buying rather than renting. And so we did talk about it. But unfortunately, I found out that he thought that building was a lot more valuable than I did, because he remembered when the building was a solid, perfect, in great shape, rentable building. But since then, all the apartments above my store and the restaurant had decayed so badly that they weren't even inhabitable. You know, as a matter of fact, some of your relatives lived up there, as you know. And one, of course, had a jewelry shop up there, and the others, one of the last inhabitants were living above the restaurant, I think, in the last good apartment up there. And the things were starting, the ceiling was falling in, and it was just in terrible shape. And so he seemed to think that that was very valuable property and could be rented. Well, I realized that it wasn't, and so I called Larry Berger at Easterday Construction Company, and I said, Larry, would you give me an estimate as to what it would take to fix this thing up to rent again? And he came down and he looked it over and he said, oh my gosh, it's going to take a lot of money. And I said, I know that, but Mr. Osborne doesn't know that, and he doesn't realize that. And I said, I need for you to help me convince him of that so that he'll give me a more reasonable price. And so Larry did put an estimate on it, and he sent it to Mr. Osborne. And Mr. Osborne called me again, and he said, well, he said, you know, I have a high regard for the Easterday Construction Company. He said, I've dealt with them a long, long time, and Mr. Berger sent me a letter and told me how much money it would take to fix that building up. And he said, and I was shocked. I got to tell you, I frankly was shocked. And he says, so I've come up with a different price for you, and he had lowered the price considerably. And so that worked out pretty well for me. And I said, well, I don't have all that much money. He said, well, I'm in the banking business, as you know. He says, so I don't think that's a problem. He says, if you want the building, he says, I really want you to have it. And he says, let's draw up a contract right now. And so we did, and he gave me as long as I wanted as far as time was concerned, and a low interest rate. So he was really, really kind to me. I had nothing but good feelings from Mr. Osborne.
That's amazing. Now, do you still own the building, or?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, what year was that? Because I'm curious about, because those apartments have been renovated.
Oh,
believe.
yes, they've been renovated by Susie when she bought the building. She bought the building, oh gosh, maybe 12 years ago or something like that. Her part of the building, and then Pam Fisher owns her part of the building. So I split the building in half is what it is, because it's actually on two pieces of property.
It is one building, though, is it?
It's one building, but it's on two pieces of land, strangely enough. So it's two deeds.
Wow.
Yeah.
So during the time you owned it, and much of the time the store was going, there just really wasn't much inhabitants upstairs in the building.
No, we used it for storage only. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I never was willing to spend a lot of money to fix them back up again, and be bothered with renters and all the trouble that goes along with that. Yeah. You know, the leaky pipes and the problems with people calling in the middle of the night saying that the furnace went out or something like that. Yeah. I just decided to leave it as storage and the heck with it.
Did most of those buildings on Main Street, I mean, most of them did have an upper level, and did most of them have a lower level, like a basement, or no?
Not really. The basement had nothing in them but a furnace and walking space. That was all. Just room that you could go in and take care of the plumbing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I owned the next set of buildings also. As a matter of fact, where the shoe stable was, you remember? Mm-hmm. That building also had apartments above, and those were rentable. Those were in good enough shape that I was able to rent those, and they're still rented today, as far as I know.
That's interesting. Now, when you first moved in, was H.L. Werner the watchmaker at the time, or had he? I'm not sure the year. No,
I think he had just gotten out of business probably a year or two before that. Okay. Because I think the watchmaker, when I first came to town back in '54, I think he might have still been up there. I'm not sure about that, but I think he might have been. But that was about the time when he stopped doing business. And it always amazed me because that was a very steep stairway all the way upstairs, and I couldn't imagine, especially older people, going all the way up there to do business with a watchmaker. But they did. There was a number of businesses in town that were in the second floor. Above Verl's Barber Shop, there was some business above there that people used to climb the stairs to get up there.
Which nowadays you'd have to have handicap access.
Oh, gosh, yes.
You know,
oh, yes.
Nobody even
Sure.
thought of that then.
And the Lions Club held their offices above, Verl's Barber Shop. And Dr. Powers, when he first came to town, he had an office above there. So, yeah, there were people doing business in the second floor.
which, like, some of these things we were talking about W. Osborne, another sort of iconic thing in Culver was the Max and Cucky boat and Captain Amon. I mean, that was running when you first got
Yes, yes, it was,
Um,
yes. And I remember Captain Amon and his son, Ed, and I think he had a sister. They were raised here in Culver. They were nice people, and were kind of characters, really. Mr. Amon and his wife ran that boat for a number of years after I moved here. It was something that everybody always wanted to do. If a friend would come visit you, why the first thing you do is go down there and take them for a ride around the lake.
Now, why was that? Was that just because it was the way? I mean, it was the one surefire way you could get a nice rider. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was something to do.
Way
It was something to do. It was kind of interesting. For one thing, if you didn't own a boat, there was no way for you to see all those beautiful cottages, and it was really, really kind of an interesting hour ride all the way around the lake. It was fun.
I'm told he narrated and sort of spun yarns.
Oh
in a
yes,
way.
he always had stories, and he was a likable guy. So it was a personality thing too.
Yeah.
He did a good job, and the boat was fun. It was a nice ride. A lot of fun.
The lake at the time, the South Shore was, as I understand it, was not as developed as it is now.
That's
I mean,
correct.
In general.
That's correct. There was fewer cottages. They were spread out considerably, so it wasn't as exciting as the rest of the lake, but it had a certain charm about it. You know, it was quiet. It was less busy, but of course the marina was down there at the time. Campbell's had bought the marina from somebody, I forget who it was they bought it from, but they were operating down there.
And it was not where it is now. I mean, that's what I'm told.
It was in the south end, and then it was changed completely. I think they filled it in or something.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Somewhat.
And there was another marina on the west shore, I guess.
Yes, that's right. And it was operating. Mm-hmm.
I guess I was just also talking about downtown, going east on Jefferson Street down to where the Cove is today.
Yes.
Were the ice houses still? I mean, I gather the buildings are still there.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Were they still operating?
Yeah, you could still go down there and buy ice. Actually, there was a small business down there selling ice. I don't know whether those big ice houses were still down there or not. I don't recall that. But the co-op was down there. That was the main business that I remember being down there for years.
The green.
And it stayed there for, another 20 years, I guess. And there was a lumber yard down there.
Is that still there? Farriers? Did they still run that?
Farrier, no, that was earlier on. Farrier had sold out to somebody else, and Diddy Babcock was running that lumber yard. And I don't know whether he owned it or somebody else owned it, but he ran it.
Still there.
There's definitely some businesses there, and the Chevy agency, car agency was down there. And then later on, Park and Shop. Yeah. I guess it was called Deckard's.
So Deckard's was in the building that became Park and Shop down there?
Yeah, I think it was Deckard's first, and then it was called Park and Shop
I
later.
didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a lot of business activity down there, and of course, right close to the downtown area here, so it all supported each other. It was very busy. At least we thought it was busy. Seemed busy at the time.
Probably busier than it is now.
Oh yeah, sure. And the bank and the finance company were going very strong. They had 30 or 40 employees, and so there was lots of business going on there. Quite a hubbub.
Yeah, that was highly regarded bank, I gather.
Oh,
It's-
tremendous, tremendous. Everybody knew about it, in the state of Indiana at least. They knew about W.O. Osborne and the State Exchange Bank.
When you first got here, were the trains still running?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they weren't doing that big business on the weekends that they had, back in the early days. But the train still came in. Sometimes we would get freight from some of our suppliers, and the man would call us up and say, you've got some freight down here, and we'd go down and pick it up and bring it back to the store. And I forget who the train master or whatever they call him.
I think the last one's name was Kinney.
Yeah, Mr.
Sticks
Kinney.
in my mind.
I think
somewhere.
Mr. Kinney was the man that was there. Yeah, Emery Kinney.
Emery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that?
He's still around.
Is he?
Well, I think so. I mean, I don't know if he's still living in Culver, but as far as I know, he's still somewhere. But
Was there still passenger service in those days, or was it mostly freight?
Yeah, it was mostly passenger and then a teeny bit of freight. Yeah, but it went to South Bend and Logansport, as far as I know.
It must have stopped not too long after you got
That's
here.
right. That's right. It was in the late 50s or early 60s that they finally gave up the ghost, and they just had very little coming through there. I think the Academy still had some coal delivered and things like that, but there just wasn't a whole lot of trains running.
Now, you talked about first coming here and working at the Academy. What did you do when you first worked at the Academy?
Well, I just hired in as a laborer, because they really didn't have an engineering department over there. That's what I had done for Shell Oil Company. I was mechanical engineering draftsman is what my game was, and then I learned to do some surveying with them on a pipeline job. So that was just an extra bonus for me. But as soon as I got there, and I was just working in their yard gang, and hoped to find a better job, of course. One day, the boss, Ray Manis, came to me and said, he said, every time we dig up on the grounds here, we tear something up, because we don't know what's underneath there. And he says, and right now we just are putting in a little sewer line down between one of the buildings, and he says, and it dawned on me that maybe if we would put on paper what we're doing today, then maybe we wouldn't tear it up tomorrow. And he says, and I understand that you do some drafting and surveying work, and he said, and I wondered if you could just put down on a piece of paper where that thing is, so that we can find it in the future. And I said, oh yeah, I can do that easily for you, So I went down there and did that. And I brought it back to him, and he looked at it and he said, oh my gosh. He said, this is just great. He said, we should have been doing this a long time ago. He said, I'm gonna have you do this every time we put in a new line, because they had their electric lines, their sewer lines, their steam lines, their water lines, everything was underground. And so they were just constantly ripping everything up, and of course that's stopped that service to the buildings. All the time. They were just having nothing but problems. And so he had me putting everything down on paper, and then they decided that maybe because they had a couple of their old plumbers retiring, and those old guys were the only ones that knew where all the plumbing lines went. And they said, maybe if you would go around with these guys and they could show you where all these lines are, maybe you could do a map of the entire campus and show us where all the sewer lines and the water lines and all the plumbing lines at least are going and coming from. And so that's what I did for the next couple of years. I worked with their older plumbers and electricians and tried to put all that on paper, and it was a massive job, really. But I enjoyed doing it, and they gave me a little office of my own and whatever equipment I needed, and it turned out to be a wonderful job. I loved it. They treated me great, and I enjoyed my work, and I guess it worked out for both of us. But then when this clothing store opportunity came along, I thought this might be a good deal for me, If I'm going to better myself, I'm going to have to do something to make more money and think to the future. And though it was questionable at the time, I still thought that maybe it was the right move. And it was for me.
So you really established the first, I don't know what you call that, but for the academy, the first. I mean, I'm sure they're still going off that and adding to it and updating it.
I'm sure they probably had somebody continue to do that after I left. Yes, that's right.
That's interesting. And you didn't have much interaction with the academy then after that, as far as institutional?
No. I did occasionally. They would ask me a question or two because something would come up and they would not know the answer to it. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. But I was willing to talk to them about it, and I was open and freely willing to do that.
Well, as I understand it, the interaction between the town and the academy has really evolved. I'm told that back maybe more when you came here, it was much more of a rigid line. I mean, the people in town didn't interact physically, at least. They didn't go to the campus much, and the cadets came to town. But that's what I'm told anyway.
I think it's warmer now. Yeah. I think it's freer. I think it's warmer. I think it's friendlier. And I don't think it was bad at that time, but I just think that people were reluctant to barge in. They acted like maybe that was separate ground over there, and that they weren't welcome. And the academy has made it known to them through the years that they're always welcome over there, and they help out on any project, and they've done a good job of PR, a real good job. And I think there's no question that we have a friendly relationship now between the town and the academy. It's wonderful.
Well, I guess before we, I don't want to grill you forever, but before we wrap up, I think of some of the buildings even in my lifetime that were sort of historic or really memorable buildings that went down, like the Osborne and the Culver Inn. And again, it's hard to imagine this now, but someday there'll be people that have no memory really of these buildings. I mean, are there sort of, I don't know, memorable structures and memorable places that just aren't here anymore that you know what I mean?
Well, as I think back, of course, there are a number of buildings that are gone. That for instance, the Marathon gas station over here, I see that in my mind a lot. And the restaurant that was on the corner right next to it, the old Klein's Appliance was the last thing. Remember, that old green building? It was kind of a funny looking structure, but it was unique. Had a lot of personality. Those are some that are strong in my mind. And of course, you mentioned the hotel. That's probably the one that I remember the most. And the Methodist church that was right up here on the corner, because it was right on the corner, it slanted. It wasn't straight. It was diagonal, you might say. It was kind of unusual. But yeah, those are the ones that strike me.
And were you ever in the Osborne inside of
the hotel?
Yeah.
Yes, I was. Yeah, it was, and it had the flavor of an old hotel. It didn't seem very fancy to me, but it was a little bit ornate. But I was in it in its later years when it was somewhat run down. They were mostly apartments.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask
People
that.
were renting them as apartments. It wasn't being used as a regular hotel. But it was pretty good, it didn't look like it was in shambles or anything, but it was kind of fun to be in there.
I didn't know that they used it as apartments.
Yeah. Yeah, there were people renting them by the month or by the week or whatever.
And do you remember what happened after that to the building? I mean, I know it went through several steps before.
No, I don't. Somebody owned it and tried to bring it up to code, I think, and it just kind of fumbled. It was a strange owner. I forget what their name was, but it was a father and son, as I recall. And I think they just sort of fumbled and couldn't make it work. it was destined to go, because in order to bring it up to code, they would have had to put in elevators and all kinds of things, and the cost was prohibitive.
Sure.
So you could almost see the handwriting on the wall. It was going to have to go.
Mm.
Sort of sad, but you can't keep everything.
Yeah. Sure.
And it was, to some people, it was an eyesore. To others, it was nostalgia.
I suppose that's true of a lot of things.
Yeah, right.
You said. Well, I guess any other sort of last comments?
Nothing that comes to mind. I'm willing to sit with you any old time if we can think of something else to talk about.
Sure.
For now, that's all that I have.
Okay.